So good to see you all. Thank you so much for coming. I'm Rob Vitesi. I'm an enterprise professor here in the School of Engineering, and it's my pleasure to be your host tonight for this water security seminar. Before we get rolling, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the Wurundjeri people, and I would like to pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and emerging. So this is the last event of the year in this series, and as you know, it's been part of a big experiment really that we've run this year to try and engage with the water sector, with industry people and academics to talk about the many dimensions of water security, of which there are many dimensions. And tonight we're looking at one really interesting one, which is environmental outcomes from the Basin Plan. Our country, more than anyone else in the world, is investing very significantly in environmental water, and we have got great professional institutions applying it systematically, and we have really interesting research programs in the country looking at the efficacy of that. And we're really lucky today to hear from three experts that are at the cutting edge of this stuff, and I'm sure that you're going to find that interesting. Our three speakers in order will first be Irene Wegener. Irene is the Acting Assistant Director in the Commonwealth Environment Water Office, Aquatic Ecosystem Policy and Science section. Her team manages the Environmental Water Office's long-term intervention monitoring program, which has got a large number of researchers involved in doing evaluations of the efficacy of environmental water. After Irene speaks for about 10 or so minutes, we'll hear from Beth Ashworth. And Beth is the founding Chief Executive Officer of the Victorian Environmental Water Holder. And they hold and manage Victoria's environmental water entitlements and have done so since 2011 when that was formed. Beth has got over 15 years of experience in water resource management and government policy in Victoria, including in interjurisdictional collaboration in the Murray-Darling Basin. So you no doubt have a lot of scars that you can share with us all. And our third speaker, Angus Webb, a good colleague in the School of Engineering. Angus is an Associate Professor in the Water, Environment and Agriculture program, and his research focuses on the ecological responses to changing environmental conditions in regulated river systems, and in particular in the monitoring, evaluation and adaptive management of environmental flows. So a great group of speakers. I thank you very much for devoting your time, all three of you, and look forward to hearing what you have to say. And Irene, you're first up. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob, and thank you for the opportunity to talk about the Commonwealth Environmental Water Office's long-term intervention monitoring project. I've only got 10 minutes, so I'll get cracking. The role of the Commonwealth Environmental Water Holder, so the CHU, was established under the Water Act to manage the Commonwealth Environmental Water Holdings Special Account, as well as the Commonwealth Environmental Water Holdings, which were acquired by the Australian Government. These holdings must be managed to protect and restore the environmental assets of the Murray-Darling Basin. And the CHU is supported by the Commonwealth Environmental Water Office, or the CHUO, to do this. Under the Water Act and the Murray-Darling Basin Plan, there are specific monitoring, evaluation and reporting activities that the CHU must undertake. So, for example, on an annual basis, the CHU must report on the management of water holdings, such as the volumes that have been delivered, when and where they've been delivered, and for what purpose and what outcomes have been achieved as a result. And so all this information contributes towards evaluating the effectiveness of the Murray-Darling Basin Plan. In order to fulfil these requirements, the TUO undertakes a range of monitoring activities which are broadly categorised as operational monitoring. So for every watering action, the volumes, the timing, the duration, location, flow rates and the depths are recorded and reported. And then there's also intervention monitoring, which may be either long or short-term monitoring. And it's this intervention monitoring, evaluation and research that is informing how the water holdings are being managed by building knowledge about the best ways to deliver environmental water with the eventual aim of meeting those targets. So just up here you can see a bit of a timeline of the monitoring, evaluation and research projects that the TUO has invested in over the last several years. The TUO works closely with basin states, the Murray-Darling Basin Authority, scientists and the local community, including First Nations, to design and undertake a lot of these projects. And to date, the Commonwealth Environmental Water Holder has invested around $80 million in monitoring and research projects across the Murray-Darling Basin. So one of the projects that the TUO manages in order to meet its legislated obligations is through the Long-Term Intervention Monitoring Project, or LTIM, which is a project that is focused on examining the contribution of Commonwealth environmental water to the environmental objectives of the Basin Plan. So there are two components to this project. One is an on-ground or a selected area monitoring component, and that ran from the 1st of July 2014 until the 30th of June this year. And then there's also a basin-scale evaluation component, which is in its final year and it's due for completion in 2020. The project is comprised of consortium monitoring teams, which involve around 30 research bodies, including some of Australia's leading universities, scientific research institutes and state agencies, and includes over 200 personnel, so it's a big project. And it comes in at a value of $30 million. So there are a range of monitoring and evaluation activities undertaken under the LTIM project, and they're undertaken at 7 selected areas across the Murray-Darling Basin. And these selected areas were chosen to provide the maximum possible coverage of areas where Commonwealth environmental watering occurs. And it was designed to complement rather than duplicate monitoring activities that were already being undertaken by basin states and the Murray-Darling Basin Authority, as well as others. As I mentioned, the LTIM project also includes a basin-scale evaluation component across the 6 themes that are listed on the slide. And the evaluation is undertaken using data across each of the selected areas, and that data is collected using standard methodologies. The standard data is needed to ensure that the results from across the selected areas are comparable and that they're able to be integrated for analysis then across the basin. In terms of the outcomes that we've seen from this project in particular, we are seeing evidence that Commonwealth environmental water is contributing towards the objectives of the Basin Plan. So, for example, we're supporting native fish populations, so in the right circumstances we're delivering environmental water during low oxygen events, as well as supporting spawning events, and providing water to support food and habitat resources. Over the last few years, there's been an increase in the amount of salt that has been exported from the Murray-Darling Basin through the Murray Mouth as a result of Commonwealth environmental water deliveries. The data is showing that there is some recovery of species of conservation significance, such as the southern bellfrog in some areas. And there's also growing evidence that strategic delivery of water is helping to sustain water birds through various critical life stages by providing different habitats for foraging and breeding. So these are just a very few of the outcomes that the LTIM project has recorded, and over the last 5 years, I guess these outcomes have added up. So the 2020 Basin Plan Evaluation is currently underway, and that's led by the Murray-Darling Basin Authority. And I think this will give us a really good idea of how we collectively, so basin states and the federal government agencies, are tracking against how the objectives of the Basin Plan are going. I think it's really important to note, though, that the outcomes from environmental waterings will take many years to be realised. So we're 7 years into the Basin Plan. Not all the water's been recovered under the Basin Plan, and there's still work progressing on relaxing constraints and implementing policy measures. And I guess in the last couple of years as well, we've seen a range of climatic conditions ranging from the very wet to the very dry, which puts pressure on the environment and influences the results we see, and also influences the way that we as environmental water managers deliver water. These aren't ecological outcomes, but I thought they were good ones to mention. So the LTIM project has provided opportunities for scientists and environmental water managers to collaborate to ensure that the best available science is integrated into the decisions that are made about the management of the water holdings. The project has also supported opportunities for scientists to network and collaborate, which they may not otherwise have had. So I guess what I mean by that is the LTIM project has provided funding for scientists from the northern and the southern basins to come together to talk about what they're seeing across the selected areas and the themes. The project has provided opportunities for us to increase our engagement with communities across the basin. And a really large data set has been generated from all this monitoring, and I just want to note that that data is available upon request to anyone who would like it. So I mentioned before that we've now completed the on-ground component of LTIM, so the selected area monitoring, and we've now transitioned to the CHUO monitoring, evaluation and research project. So this project essentially continues LTIM on-ground activities and the basin-scale evaluation activities for another couple of years, just with a couple of added extras. And that's allowing us some time to undertake a comprehensive independent review of both the LTIM and the environmental water research and knowledge project that's also just wrapped up. And that'll be used to help inform what a future post-2022-23 monitoring, evaluation and research project may look like. So thank you.
Thanks, Irene. So the Victorian Environmental Water Holder has a key role in the watering program, but it truly is a partnership program. It couldn't happen without the hard work of a range of organisations and community members. One thing I would like to note in the context of tonight's theme is that environmental watering in northern Victoria is not just about the Basin Plan, though it's obviously a significant and somewhat controversial addition to the program. But the first environmental water entitlement in Victoria was established in the 1990s in the Murray system. So the watering program's been going for over 2 decades now, and it's exciting to have the opportunity to talk to you tonight about the outcomes we're seeing from that program and how we're expecting those outcomes to increase over time. So first I'll talk about what we're trying to achieve, outline a couple of case studies, and then talk about some of the broader community benefits of environmental watering. So what are the outcomes we're trying to achieve? Our primary objectives are really around fish, birds and vegetation, though sometimes also turtles, frogs and platypus. At least 70 species benefited from environmental watering in 2018-19, and at least 28 of those are threatened species. Now, healthy populations of fish and birds need good habitat and good food sources for feeding, breeding and migration. Healthy plant populations need a good drink at the right time, and environmental watering helps to provide all of that. But there's also lots of species that we're not specifically targeting that also benefit from environmental water. So terrestrial animals like kangaroos need drinking holes. Small marsupials in the top middle there, the planigale, one of my personal favourites at the moment, finds habitat and food resources in drying wetlands. And I would also like to note we're definitely not aiming for pristine condition everywhere. We're targeting the highest priority sites and trying to protect only the values that the community really cares most about. And the benefits that we're seeing today, and that I'll be talking to you a little bit about today, are initial signs based on 10 to 20 years of intervention, and we're expecting only bigger and better things to come with continued environmental watering over time. So, some of the key achievements to date over the past decade or two. Water for the environment is helping to prevent the extinction of species at a local, regional and state level. In 2013, moira grass populations in the Barmah forest had decreased by 96% over 80 years. Now, moira grass, well, it doesn't sound very exciting, is a foundation of the forest's ecosystem. It provides a major nutrient source, provides food and habitat for a range of species, and without the right watering regime, we were looking at a local extinction in a matter of years, and environmental watering prevented that. Over the years, we've sustained hundreds of critical drought refuges that have enabled fish and other water-dependent species to survive through the hottest, driest parts of summer. And environmental watering has helped these systems not only recover from drought, but also devastating bushfires as well. So in the Golden Broken wetlands, water for the environment helped river red gums and other vegetation to recover from bushfire, and also brought water birds back to roost, feed and breed. And finally, we're helping to safeguard internationally recognised habitats for migratory birds. Now, these sites are world-renowned, which to me highlights the importance of protecting these sites, not just for Australia, but for communities around the world. So, the first case study I'd like to talk about is the Living Murray program. It's a joint program of the Victorian, New South Wales, South Australian and Commonwealth governments that began in 2002, and it focuses on 6 high-priority sites along the River Murray. Now, part of 4 of those sites are in Victoria: Barmah Forest, Gumbower Forest, Hatter Lakes and the Lindsay-Walpolar Islands. And the program created environmental water entitlements, mainly through water savings, which provide a long-term average of 500 gigalitres a year. But it also constructed structural works at many of these sites that allow watering of really high-priority wetlands and floodplains without overbank flows, which require far greater amounts of water to hit similar targets. So you can see there's a huge focus on efficiency in the watering program. We're targeting the highest priority sites, trying to use the least amount of water, not dissimilar to trying to optimise productivity on a farm. So after years of community consultation, collation of the best available science, thorough planning, implementation, the joint program's now able to demonstrate some of those long-term outcomes. Last year, the Living Murray program published 10 years of monitoring at the icon sites. And this table summarises those results. It's a report card style, similar to what students would get in a school. A grades are given to sites in excellent condition, where 75 to 100% of ecological objectives are met. B grade for good condition, C grade for fair condition, and D grade where the site needs serious attention. So you've got time going up on the left-hand side there from 2006 to 2017. And then the icon sites listed along the top. And while there is variation from year to year, you can clearly see that at the sites where environmental water has been able to be regularly provided, overall condition has improved. So let's look at the Barmah Forest as an example. In 2006-07, it needed serious attention, D grade. Then with regular strategic watering, from 2009 we're getting improvements, C or B grade, until in 16-17 we got an A grade site. And that pattern or trajectory is similar for all of the sites, including Hatter Lakes, all of our Victorian sites, Hatter Lakes, Lindsay, Walpolla and Gumbower Forest. So if we look at Gumbower Forest as the next example, similar trajectory, we've got condition fluctuating between a B and D grade, but with regular watering, especially since the works were completed in 2014, we've now got a consistent B grade, but still with some work to do. Directly on the other side of the river, you've got Kundruk-Paracuta Forest, which provides a really nice comparison site. So it's similar ecology, similar objectives, but the main difference is environmental water hadn't been able to be delivered to that site at all during this period. And you can see the impact that's had on condition. There's been no improvement whatsoever, with the site still really needing serious attention, although we were able to water it a little bit this year. This map further illustrates that point. So you've got the River Murray flowing through the middle there, Gumbower Forest to the south and Kundruk-Paracuta to the north. And it's satellite imagery that shows the parts of Gumbower Forest that have regularly received environmental water over the past 5 years have vegetation that's in good condition right throughout the year, even in the hottest parts of summer, whereas virtually all of Kundruk-Paracuta, the vegetation's dry and stressed. And these images are supported by on-ground assessments. Now, before I move on to the next case study, one thing I would like to note is that achieving these environmental outcomes is absolutely not a case of just add water. Environmental watering is just one tool in the toolkit. Complementary works and measures are absolutely critical to achieving these outcomes, and these photos show that really clearly. So the top left photo shows the improved condition of the threatened moira grass population when stock and feral animals are excluded from the site by a fence. And the bottom right photos show the improved condition of threatened river swamp wallaby grass, that's quite the mouthful, in Gumbower Forest when carp are excluded using cages. So that's why it's just so important that environmental watering is provided as part of an integrated catchment management framework, and that's the role of our catchment management authorities. So moving on to the next case study around native fish. Now, we know that several native fish populations, especially golden perch and silver perch, operate not at a site scale, but a much larger spatial scale across the whole southern connected basin. Fish breed episodically in certain parts of the system when the conditions are just right, but they need to move to other parts of the system throughout their life cycle. Now, the natural floods in 2010 and 2016 triggered large breeding events of golden perch and silver perch in the hotspot area circled there in the lower Darling and lower Murray. And those fish rely on a high flow trigger to move to other parts of the system where they can access different habitats and resources. So in autumn 2017, the year after the natural floods, environmental water managers provided coordinated flows down the Victorian tributaries of the Murray to trigger that fish movement. And monitoring showed significant numbers of golden perch and silver perch moved upstream from the Murray into the Victorian tributaries where 70% of them stayed. So environmental water supports not just fish movement but also spawning and growth. And Victorian monitoring has shown that there's a significant increase in the abundance of native fish since the millennium drought and through the use of environmental water. But it's not just about keeping the plants, fish and birds alive. Healthy waterways underpin healthy communities. So environmental watering is providing significant social, recreational, economic and Aboriginal cultural values. Anglers have access to more fish. Bird watchers travel to wetlands to see migratory species. Healthy forests support healthy bee populations, which help with crop pollination. Town amenities improved, community mental health and wellbeing is improved. There was a survey in the Wimmera system, which is technically part of the Murray-Darling Basin, that showed the vast majority of over 1,500 people surveyed strongly agreed that the lakes and weirs in their region were some of the community's best assets and that they increased community spirit, they increased the number of social functions and they encouraged more people to stay in or visit the region. So I think all of these benefits are really important, but including when people are under pressure due to drought. We and our partners are also increasingly working with traditional owners to better protect Aboriginal cultural values at the sites we work with, including Horseshoe Lagoon, which is not only an important environmental site but also a really significant Tangerang women's site. And that's what's shown there in the photo. Now, just to summarise, even though it's only been occurring for about 2 decades in Victoria, environmental watering's already showing demonstrated and tangible outcomes. And these outcomes aren't just about the plants and animals that environmental water is targeting, but also providing real social, cultural and economic benefits for communities. With continued watering and ongoing investment in monitoring, I think we can optimise and demonstrate even greater outcomes over time. So it's really exciting to me to think about what this presentation would look like in 10 or 20 years' time. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Beth. So we're sort of moving down in scale. We've gone from basin scale to state scale, and now I'm going to talk about one particular program within the overall LTIM project. Glad I can use that acronym now that Irene's defined it for me, because I have to say it a lot during this presentation. I just wanted to start by, I guess, acknowledging the efforts of the many people who've been involved in the Goulburn LTIM program over 5 years. The photos up the top are those who are currently involved. The list of names is longer. It has been very much a group effort. Our program has been operating in a sort of hubs and spokes model with these sort of experts out in the field collecting data, and unfortunately myself and Dan Liu stuck in the office here worrying about reporting and balancing budgets and managing the overall project. But it has worked very well for us. I'm going to take you on a rapid tour of some of our results from the program, but first I wanted to introduce you to the logic of it, and it builds on things that both Irene and Beth have said earlier tonight. So the end game for environmental flows of the scale being delivered under the Basin Plan is a long-term thing. We are expecting to be working for decades. But we need to see whether we're on the right path to deliver those ends. So what we want to do is actually monitor what we call means objectives to see whether we're creating the right conditions, the right processes, the right mechanisms that in time we will see the structural changes that we're hoping to see in bird communities, adult fish communities, mature vegetation assemblages. So this is the conceptual model upon which we built our monitoring program. Here's our ultimate means, the hydrology, the water being delivered from Commonwealth Environmental Water. These brown boxes are sort of basal mechanisms, if you like, the provision of habitat and the augmentation of primary production and ecosystem respiration. These purple ones are a couple of life history attributes that tell us whether the fish populations are going to be enabled to become better over time. And, wrong button, these are the things that we want to see over the longer time period, although some of them we do see in a shorter time as well. So I'll rapidly dash through some results now, just some examples of each of these. So firstly, we are delivering very good amounts of environmental water. The green lines on these plots are water that has been delivered, these hydrographs down the Goulburn River, specifically from the environmental water account. And you can see that major events are being largely and indeed almost totally driven by environmental water. This is active management. This is releasing water for very specific purposes to drive specific ecological responses, some of which I'll show you in a moment. Jeff Veets has been developing hydraulic models of habitat that allows us to translate flow into things that actually matters for the animals and plants living in the system. So this is a velocity map at one of our sites. Red velocities are higher, blue and green are lower. This allows us to translate volume of water into a, let's say, extent of shallow, slow-flowing habitat, which we believe to be very important for production of zooplankton, for habitat for small-bodied fish, and for vegetation growth, aquatic vegetation. We can take that sort of information and use it to predict changes in other responses. Our bank monitoring program, run by Jeff Veets as well, has shown that this is an active river channel. Erosion and deposition are occurring all the time. That's what we expect to see. When we see serious erosion events like this notching on the bank here, it's when we have flows that are travelling too high for too long at a steady state. And that's more often than not associated with consumptive flows being delivered down the river, particularly in the last couple of years, inter-valley transfers for water being traded down to Sunraysia. Ecosystem metabolism is primary production and respiration, the breakdown of organic matter. What you're looking at here is rates of carbon fixation, the creation of food for the base of the food web. And you can see that they change over seasons and they change over different flow events, but more importantly, when we get more water in the channel, we wet up greater proportions of the channel, creates more habitat for algae, and it drives primary production and respiration. So we see an augmentation of the amount of carbon being fixed in the system to drive food webs. Moving on from there, in a couple of important macroinvertebrate species that are prey for some of our large-bodied native fish, the prawn macrobrachium and the shrimp paratia, we see a bump in productivity when we get organic matter coming into the channel. Now, this was most dramatically demonstrated after the natural floods in 2016, when we saw a large increase in biomass in the summer following those floods. That was quite a lot larger than what we saw following spring flow events that we can deliver with Commonwealth environmental water, which remain in the channel. Our working hypothesis is that organic matter, bark, leaves, that sort of thing, being brought in off the floodplain into the channel by these events, these large events, is what's driving production in this system. For bankside vegetation, we've seen a slow but steady recovery following the sort of devastation wrought during the millennium drought with improved bankside vegetation over time. But we see ups and downs as well. So in 2015-16, which was a very dry year, we delivered water not very far up the bank. You could see the fringing vegetation is doing okay here, but further up the bank it's not so good. In 2018, following the floods in 2016 and then good environmental flow delivery in 2017, you can see that further up the bank, things are looking a lot healthier there. However, this was also the year that we started to see substantial increases in inter-valley transfers moving down the system, which led to prolonged inundation, sort of a half a metre above where we would like to see it, half a metre to a metre. And if you squint and look closely, you can see that the vegetation right down by the water's edge is mostly dead there, or at least browned off and in poor condition. So that's a challenge for us to manage into the future. Fish movement was just touched on by Beth. So we were acoustic tracking fish movement, particularly with golden perch. This is one particularly intrepid fish that we first tagged about 140 kilometres upstream in the Goulburn River, 140 kilometres upstream from the mouth of the Murray. This is flow in the Murray, this is flow in the Goulburn. You can see that this fish hung around and did nothing for a long time, but then on a flow event in 2016 decided to up shop and moved over the course of only about 3 or 4 months, some 600 kilometres through to Henley near the mouth of the Edward River in New South Wales, which shows just what Beth was saying, that these fish operate at a much larger scale and we cannot manage them just by thinking about individual rivers at the same time. Fish spawning has been a great success of the Goulburn program. We're now very confident that we can induce spawning in golden perch by delivering high flow events in late spring when water temperatures are over about 18.5 degrees centigrade. We've got really good understanding, building on 5 years of data from LTIM and more than 10 years of data that Wayne Costa was collecting before that up at ARI. So we've got a very powerful data set there now, and we think we've really solved this one. We know how to do it. And our adult fish sampling is showing fish go up and down in the system. There's been a couple of adverse events in the last couple of, longer ago than that. We had a significant fish kill 3 years ago. But overall, we see good numbers of Murray cod, Murray River rainbow fish. We're seeing increasing numbers of trout cod, and indeed the first evidence of this species breeding in the Goulburn system for about 5 or 10 years, so since before the drought really decimated populations. So we're seeing improvements there. So those are results. I'd just like to touch on the idea of adaptive management before we finish. So the way that water is actually delivered in the Goulburn is a reasonably convoluted process. It involves the Goulburn Broken CMA coming up with a seasonal watering proposal. Sorry, CMA is the Catchment Management Authority. A seasonal watering proposal each year, which is passed to Beth's group, who incorporate that into the seasonal watering plan for the state of Victoria, potentially with some changes. Oops. That then, oh dear me, excuse me. That then goes up to Canberra, to Irene and her colleagues, to incorporation into the overall plan. But then when we want to actually deliver water, it's a negotiated process amongst these three groups plus Goulburn Murray Water, who are the river operators for the Goulburn system. The nice thing that's happened in the last few years is that members from the Goulburn LTIM team, the scientists involved in that team, have gotten directly involved in these conversations so that the things that we're learning right now can be used to inform these decisions. We've short-circuited the reporting process, so we don't have to wait for the annual report to come out. It's more a phone call. The relationships and the trust is built to the point where we're able to get directly involved in these conversations, and this was some of the benefits that Irene was talking about in her presentation. And that leads to us making a decision to turn the taps on at some point and to get an ecological response. So my take-home messages are that environmental water in the Goulburn system definitely is having ecological benefits. I will stand up and say that in any public forum. We are concentrating our efforts at the moment looking at these means, the mechanisms that we're providing to infect long-term changes in the structure of the system that we expect to see over the course of decades. But we're not just using the monitoring to see how we're going in terms of delivering environmental water. We're actively using that knowledge to improve the way we deliver environmental water into the future so that we get the most out of this very precious resource. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you. 3 great talks. I think they've provided a really good foundation for a conversation now we can have with you about environmental outcomes from basin watering. And we've seen stuff at 3 different scales, and can see some questions are starting to come through. Let me throw this first one. I might throw this one to you, Angus, but invite Beth or Irene to chip in too. Environmental monitoring and evaluation has advanced greatly in the last decade. Do we have a sustainable research and investment model to continue to build the knowledge? We heard a little bit about the programs which are currently funded by the TUO, but they've got a horizon on them at the moment. I just wonder what you think, and maybe you could come in later too, Irene.
Yeah, that's a tough one. Programs like LTIM and MER have really provided a bit of, I wouldn't say long-term, it's medium-term security that allows us to think about collecting data sets over decade-scale sort of time frames. And that's more or less unprecedented. It has been a really major investment, and the Commonwealth is to be greatly acknowledged for doing that. At the same time, I suppose we are always slightly looking over our shoulders at what's coming or where things are going. I think I'd stop short of saying there is a sustainable research and development pipeline, but the opportunities do keep arising more opportunistically rather than with a long-term plan for this sort of thing.
Mm. It's certainly the largest component of water R&D funding at the moment, as far as I can see.
It is, yeah.
So it's great that that's happening. Any perspective from you, Irene?
I guess we're quite fortunate in that we have the special account, which does allow us to invest in those longer term monitoring projects. And yeah, like I said, it's really important for the Commonwealth Environmental Water Holder to have that ongoing monitoring feeding into the decisions that are made about the environmental water holdings. And I think some of the results that we've seen to date really highlight how important it is for water delivery officers and for the CHU to demonstrate that there is value in the water holdings.
Yeah. It's not cheap to do field work, of course, and it's surprisingly over the years through my career I've noticed that field work in hydrology and ecology has really dropped away, and been a lot more accent on computer modelling and stuff like that. So it's great to see on-the-ground monitoring programs collecting primary data. Yeah.
One of the interesting things on that is over a 5-year program, you realise you could do things better with new methods as they emerge, and you face a tension there between continuing with a long-term data set using the original method that you had and maintaining maximum comparability across the longer time frames, or moving to something that might be more efficient or may give you more data for the same amount. So we took a pretty major decision in our Goulburn program when we transitioned to MER to replace the way we'd been doing bank erosion, which was Jeff clambering up and down banks, hammering bicycle spokes into the bank and seeing how much they accreted or retreated. And now we've replaced that with drone-based monitoring, which gives us almost infinitely much larger number of data points, but probably each being less accurate than the original ones.
Yeah, right. Terrific. Right, Beth, here's a curly one for you. I'm sure you sweat on this quite a bit. The water prices are very high at the moment. How would you respond to calls for environmental water to be provided to consumptive users in times of scarcity?
We do respond to calls for environmental water to be provided to consumptive users in times of scarcity quite often. And yeah, water trading is a small but really critical part of our business. We have bought and sold in basically every year that we've been around since 2011. Most recently sold 10 gigs in the Murray and Goulburn systems last year, and using revenue from that to invest in Fishway at Kundruk in the Gumbow system. So it is, yeah, a really small but critical part. We are constantly assessing our demand and supply to see whether we're going to optimise outcomes through using the water, carrying it over for critical needs next year, or selling it and generating revenue to invest in environmental works. So, but our legislation is very, very clear that we can only sell water, buy or sell water where it's optimising environmental outcomes. So.
Right, okay. Yeah, how does that differ from you guys? I didn't think you were allowed to trade your environmental water reserve.
So the Commonwealth Environmental Water Holder is allowed to, but there are a certain set of criteria that are outlined under the Water Act when the Commonwealth Environmental Water Holder is able to do that. And during dry times, the environment also needs water, and the water holder needs to protect and restore the environment first and foremost.
Yep, right. Yep, okay, great. All right, what else have we got here? There's a question here about, okay, this one I like better. How do you separate the impacts of natural variability, consumptive delivery and environmental watering? I guess this kind of talks a little bit to the scorecard thing and how you see this flux. There appears to be a trend, but you can certainly see better results in wet years and so on. So is this difficult to actually tease out these multiple factors in assessing progress?
It is. So the way we're tackling it in the Goulburn program, and that's not necessarily the same as some of the other selected areas, is the statistical analysis that we do of the data that we're collecting tries to draw a relationship between the amount of water experienced. It might be volume, it might be a height, it might be velocity, and ecological outcomes from that. And when you do that, it means that you're no longer thinking about environmental water versus consumptive water versus anything else. It's just all water. And the other thing you can do then is run your models predictively to see what we believe things would look like if we didn't deliver any environmental water. And we're able to make some reasonable predictions for certainly a good number of our endpoints that things wouldn't be looking nearly as good. I'll hand back over to these guys for things like the scorecards there.
Yeah, I think it is inherently challenging, and this is the complexity of trying to maintain natural values in, essentially highly managed systems, and that's why a range of different monitoring programs are really important. The scorecard that I spoke to was about condition monitoring, so it really is just showing change in condition over time. But the intervention monitoring that these two spoke about is an important complement to that, and that's where you start to tease out some of those different contributing factors and start to reduce the confounding factors, and that's where you really start to get your adaptive management from as well. Specific research projects have really contributed to differentiating between, for example, on the Goulburn, the impact of intervalley transfers from the benefits of environmental watering. So yeah, you need a range of programs, I think.
Yeah, great. There's a good question here about communication with the community, and kind of wondering a little bit about this myself, whether you feel you're kind of winning the hearts and minds of people in the community about the benefits of these programs. It's can be very technical. Just wondering what some of the challenges are that you both have, or all three of you in fact, in communicating these outcomes to communities in the basin.
That's a very good question. So yeah, community engagement is absolutely a critical part of the program. Support for the program is really important for its continuation, really. There is a lot of debate, thanks Sharon, there is a lot of debate about, particularly in the context of Basin Plan, and all of those viewpoints are valid and all of those things should continue to be debated. Are we winning the hearts and minds? Very good question, very subjective question. I think there are a lot of people and communities who are hurting out there from a lot of reform over the past 15 years, Basin Plan just one of them, and who are hurting from dry conditions at the moment. And I think environmental watering can be seen as one of the contributing factors. But there are also a lot of supporters, and I spoke to this in my presentation, there are still a strong contingent of people who absolutely see the value in environmental watering and absolutely believe in the benefits that it provides.
Yep. Any perspectives from...
Oh gosh, it's so hard, and I think it's something that environmental water holders have been working on to try and find a way to communicate the messages about what Commonwealth Environmental Water is achieving. The Commonwealth Environmental Water Office has local engagement officers out on the ground, and they're our eyes and ears out there for those of us who sit in Canberra. And they get out and they communicate with communities, but in terms of written messages, it's an area that we still need to do some work on, I think.
Right.
Because there's some great stories out there, but when you read the media clips every morning, they're not getting out there.
Yeah. The media are a law unto themselves in many ways. There's a related question, Angus, maybe you might like to tackle, and it's how you might get the community involved in the monitoring process. Do you see opportunities for that?
So we're actually running a bit harder on that in our new program with the Monitoring Evaluation Research program as it's getting underway. So Through our team in the Goulburn, we had the Catchment Management Authority as a member of our team rather than as our client. They were very good at engaging and getting messages out into the community to try to talk about what we were doing and what we were seeing. And so I think I'm quite fortunate in that regard from the point of view of our project. With there is an issue involved with monitoring in terms of people's qualifications and skill level, experience, and indeed for some of the monitoring programs you've got to have, you're not allowed on a electro-fishing boat unless you've got a coxswain's ticket, for instance. So there are real hurdles there, but what we're doing in particular in the new program is trying to engage very heavily with the local Indigenous community and getting some of their young people involved in the vegetation monitoring at the moment and possibly some of the other programs. We did have the Water Watch group helping us out with the stream metabolism work. They were out servicing our probes and collecting data for us, and then unfortunately they got disbanded. And so it's now being handled by a commercial consultant doing that. So that was unfortunate that happened. So we've certainly been trying to. Could we do more? Probably. Are we doing nothing? Definitely not.
Yeah, I think there's some really great examples out there. It's definitely not the majority of monitoring that's done involves community members, but there are some really good examples. So some of the fish monitoring that I spoke to involves analysing the ear bones or otoliths of fish, and Arthur Ryler Institute and a bunch of other organisations have had a program, I think, possibly in the Goulburn system, possibly not, where they're getting fishermen along, they've caught their fish before they take them home to the dinner table, teach them how to extract the ear bone, gets sent off for testing, and then the fishermen all get, a report card about where their fish has been and how old it is and all the other amazing data that you can get from these ear bones. And a bunch of really good bird monitoring projects as well, involving citizen science at Lake Cullen in the North Central region. So yeah, there are some really, really good examples, but yeah, definitely more could be done.
Yeah, terrific. All right, I might throw this at all three of you and see who wants to field it. Can you describe how high priority sites for environmental water are determined and speak to how you prioritise those sites and the various ecological objectives that you set? What's the process? Yeah.
I'm happy to start with that if you like. So in Victoria, we've absolutely got a bottom-up planning framework. So our catchment management authorities are sort of the local face of environmental watering. They work with their local communities to identify what values of the waterways the communities care about most. Whole bunch of science undertaken then to work out not only what the flows are required to protect those, but also the complementary works and measures that I spoke about. That all then gets put up through the state planning framework and through regional waterway strategies, environmental water management plans, seasonal watering proposals that get submitted to us. And from that, they identify their highest priorities from a regional scale, and we look across those catchment management boundaries to identify the highest priorities from a statewide perspective, I suppose. And there's, some pretty universal criteria that guide that: the conservation significance, the extent of the outcome that you're expecting, the feasibility, the certainty of the outcome, all of that type of thing. Whether the level of risk is acceptable, et cetera, et cetera. So. Yep. There's a solid framework around it all, involving not just assessment of ecological outcomes, but also community consultation and science.
More than a thought bubble then, huh?
Absolutely, more than a thought bubble.
Good. Have you guys got any additional perspectives?
I don't really. I just went where the Commonwealth told me to go. So.
I guess we work very closely with our state partners and with the scientists who are involved in the various monitoring programs. I guess we're not the experts on the ground, and so we rely very heavily on them to help identify those priority sites and work together to get water to those sites.
My recollection in the early days of the Basin Plan development, there was a great, huge, in fact Sharon Davis, who's in the room somewhere, I think was maybe involved in some of the prioritisation of the high-value ecologic objectives. Is that right?
We had high priority indicator sites to look at how to identify flow regime requirements.
Right, yeah. So it was quite a long process of expert advice that was elicited from memory. Yeah. All right, let's move on to another one now. Beth, you showed that there are these kind of additional benefits that come. It's not just fish feathers that benefit from this, and you did mention that the community actually gets some benefit through amenity value and the like. And someone's asking here as to whether you're actually measuring any of those components of how communities benefit from some of these outcomes.
It's a space we're starting to move into, definitely. There's been a few projects across Victoria that look at the socio-economic benefits of environmental watering and really trying to quantify that in economic terms. There's some aspects of it that it's relatively easy to do. An example of that might be carbon offset impact of encouraging vegetation growth in a wetland. There's sort of quite formulaic values that you can use there to get an answer. There's some things that are inherently difficult to quantify, and some of that is what's called the existence or bequest value of knowing that these environments exist. People, even if they're never going to visit the site, they inherently value knowing that it's there and knowing that they'll be able to pass that down to future generations, and that stuff is really, really hard. But in reality, it's probably the majority of the economic value of what we're doing. So yeah, we're starting to move into that space, but it's inherently difficult.
All right. This is now another kind of a sciencey question, which I've wondered about this as well. Is the research indicating the frequency of environmental water that is required to sustain ecosystems? In other words, when we kind of started this whole environmental water science stuff, we had conceptual models of what ecosystems needed, and we modelled a lot of the watering regimes around them. Since you've been monitoring now over many years, has that kind of changed your kind of concept of what is really needed? Or is it just validating?
I don't think it's fundamentally changed a lot of those early beliefs, although it's definitely fine-tuned them. The golden perch spawning is a brilliant example that there's been sort of anecdotal evidence around for quite some time that elevated water temperatures, high spring flows, we should see a response. But now we're able to really put numbers on that of how, in the lower Goulburn anyway, we know that how many megalitres per day, what sort of flow rate we need, and we don't want to do that until after we're over about 18.5 degrees centigrade in the water. And once we're there, we've got a sort of a 80-90% chance that we'll see a spawning response if that happens. So that really fine-tunes us. I think the area where we've really overturned a lot of belief was not so much about environmental water per se, but the issue of large-scale system connectivity, particularly around the fish populations. So it's really not that long ago that we thought that golden perch bred in Goulburn River and grew up there and stayed there, and it's work through some of the Victorian programs and Brenton Zampatti from Sardi that's really shown the extent over which these guys sort of live, drive and survive, and it's exciting stuff.
Yeah, right. Yeah. All right. This is an interesting one. Do you see any risks from the ACCC inquiry or the big government inquiry to the CHU or the views, objectives and current activities? Is any of this kind of concerning you, but are there relevant issues to be discussed here about your roles in these inquiries?
So this is the inquiries into water markets and trading. I think we're a public organisation, public authority that's acting in the public interests, and as such we try to be good corporate citizens when participating in the market and purely transparent and reporting on everything we do and giving good indication to the market before we make a trade. So in that respect, I think both the reviews are just about transparency, and we welcome transparency. So no, I'm not seeing any huge risks from either of them.
Yep.
Yeah, it's not an area that I work in the office, so I've got nothing to add on to Beth.
Yep. Okay, good. All right. Beth, this one's for you. This is, you mentioned constraints in your talk, and it was you actually. Sorry, Irene. So someone in the audience would just like someone to talk about constraints. What are they, and why are they important for environmental watering?
Okay, I'll do my best. I might need Angus's help. So when I was talking about constraints, I was talking about the ability to deliver flows over bank. There's operational constraints. We can't go over bank because there's private property, and the Commonwealth Environmental Water Holder acts as, has a policy to not impact any third party through the inundation of private land. There are benefits to overbank inundation, and so constraints, under the Basin Plan are being addressed. But yeah, that's an area of work.
Yeah, I can expand on that a bit. So we saw, I mentioned one of the results from the Goulburn, where we saw this great boost in macroinvertebrate, in prawn and in shrimp productivity after the natural floods in 2016, and we do believe that's because the water got out onto the floodplain and brought in a whole lot of organic matter, which was then able to be broken down and incorporated into the food web. So there's been people working hard and for many years now on these constraints and trying to come up with creative ways of reducing them, or perhaps circumventing them in other ways. And it's ongoing work, because I'm just trying to remember who it was. I'm pretty sure it was Beth who said it's not just add water. By taking these sort of extra actions, we could really increase the environmental benefit that arises from the environmental water when delivered. So we're working within the channel mostly at the moment. We'd like to be working a little bit out of it sometimes as well.
Yep.
And the only thing I'd add to that is, the constraints are just flow limits at different parts of the system, and some of them, some of the work looking at addressing the constraints isn't just looking at going over bank, though there would be significant ecological benefits from that. But there is some work to be done even to look at being able to go provide higher flow limits even within the channel. And so basin governments are going through a huge process that started some time ago, but I think is going to go for the next 5 years, working with communities to work out what flow limits are possible into the future.
Right. There's a lot of moving parts in water reform, and some things have gone really well, but often I hear that constraints is one of the parts of water reform where people feel a little underwhelmed about progress. Do you share that view, that we're not kind of cracking the problem quick enough, or you don't think it's really stopping us from generating significant environmental outcomes?
I think it's really hard. It's a really hard program. You think about when Hume Dam was built and trying to negotiate easements all downstream of that. It's an ongoing program from 10 years ago. This stuff is really, really challenging, and I think you can't forget that. So while progress may have been slow, there has been some progress, and you really need to bring communities on the journey with you in this stuff. The big stick doesn't work with this stuff, I think.
Yeah. I'm not suggesting a big stick, but I'm just wondering whether we are actually getting people's mindset changing a little bit about the importance of it and getting some negotiated outcomes for communities. Do you see that happening, or are we frozen?
It's an ongoing challenge. I'm hopeful. I'm optimistic, definitely. But yeah, it's a long, hard program.
Yeah. Okay.
I'll give you a small anecdote from a workshop we held in the Goulburn last week, where a local landholder was talking about the importance of getting water onto the floodplain to restore the integrity of the entire ecosystem. So I don't know how long he's felt that way, but he's definitely a local advocate and probably not from the the typical advocacy groups. So.
Mm-hmm. Yep, right. Interesting. Okay. Now, I don't understand this question entirely, but you might understand it better than me. Can the environmental water holders influence environmental drying, such as to manage prolonged inundation from IVTs?
I might answer that in several stages. So I'll give the easy scientific background. So the IVTs are the inter-valley transfers. That's the water being sent downstream primarily for trade purposes. So agricultural water that's coming out of, in case I know, in the Goulburn, Lake Eildon, heading down the Goulburn and being used mostly in the sort of Sunraysia Riverina areas. What we're experiencing is much higher flows during summer months than the river would really like. So sort of 2 or 3 times the amount of water that we would ideally see going down as base flows. And that is leading to demonstrable ecological impacts on the channel itself and vegetation, and also hypothesised impacts on some of the fish species and probably ecosystem metabolism as well. So we'd like to see less water, and that's probably where I hand pass to these guys about what the water holders can do.
So can environmental water holders influence it? It's a river operations issue. It's about operating the river to deliver primarily consumptive water. Environmental water managers do work with river operators. In some instances, there's the ability to for them to help shape those flows to minimise impact or optimise environmental benefits from those flows. But can we directly influence it? No. But environmental watering is helping, in the Goulburn, is helping to stabilise that bank vegetation, which is helping to offset that impact of the inter-valley transfers. So yeah, I would hate to see the impact of the IVTs if environmental watering wasn't occurring.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. It's kind of a related question here. Are there opportunities to get environmental benefits when water is being delivered for consumptive purposes? I'm aware that inside the NDBA, the river operators are thinking about how they might blend environmental watering and regular water delivery stuff together. Any perspectives on this?
I know that we've managed it occasionally. Certainly in the early first year of the long-term intervention monitoring project in the Goulburn, there were inter-valley transfers travelling down during summer. But the volumes were much smaller, and so Jeff Earl, who was working at the Catchment Management Authority at the time, was able to negotiate with the river operator to basically get a small series of environmental pulses out of that water, and so it hit some of our environmental endpoints, our flows that we were trying to deliver and would have otherwise delivered from environmental water using the consumptive water. The last couple of years has been much more challenging with the much larger amounts travelling down during summer.
Yep, right.
Yeah, there's a few really good examples of that. I think optimising outcomes from all sources of water is a really important part of river operations. There's examples of diverting Goulburn water down through the Western Waranga Channel down the lower Campaspe, so diverting it a different way, not the most efficient way, but then environmental water holders paying sort of the additional losses, if you like, from that. So yeah, there's lots of innovative opportunities like that when river operators and environmental water holders work together.
Great. All right, we've got about another 5 minutes to go. I think we might just throw it open to the audience to ask some live questions now. Yes, please.
I'm Ian Blair, I'm in agriculture. I went to a very interesting talk by the part of the university on data analytics, and they brought together ABS, ATO, land and property sales and things. And I was just wondering whether you were working with them, because that would enable you to get a baseline and then a before and after. How does economy decline through the lack of environmental water, or goes up because jobs and things are available? And just asking you whether you're aware of that, because I think they could be very helpful to you.
No, not aware of that, but absolutely, that sounds really interesting, and I'll catch up with you after. That'd be great. Thank you.
Any other takers? It's a fully charged bar over there, of course, and we're kind of keen to start the end of year celebrations. I'm going to ask a question then. I made the remark at the beginning of the event that I sense that we're kind of the kind of international cutting edge here in terms of the kind of institutional structures and the quantum of environmental water that we're managing and the monitoring that we're doing. It seems pretty cool to me, but I'm not across, what's happening all across the world. What's your sense of it? Are there other countries and institutions that you look to as, for inspiration, or do you feel that indeed we are as a country kind of at this cutting edge?
I'm happy to talk to that. Typical academic, I try to get overseas to a conference at least once a year, maybe twice, and I'm frequently talking about the Basin Plan and monitoring being done under it. You've nailed it, Rob. It is actually really the world-leading program. Australia actually managed to set up a small export industry during the California drought, where there were there were some Australian water experts being flown over to California to advise them on what they should be doing about their drought problems because of our experiences, particularly during the Millennium Drought, and what we'd done with the ownership and trading of water, the setting up of water markets, the instigation of environmental flows, and the water reform process, which had been ongoing for such a long time. So, Australia really is punching above its weight in that area. It's difficult. I don't know whether it's a nice historical accident that our institutions were set up to be able to change, or whether it was a sort of force of character out of the 1994 COAG agreement that really kicked off the water reform process. But if we look particularly to somewhere like the US, we feel like it would be a heck of a lot harder to unscramble the egg there because of their system of water rights as prior appropriation and that sort of thing. But no, we should be proud of the work we're doing here.
Yeah. What about you guys?
I'm a typical Victorian water manager and take great pride in our water management framework, so I think it's the best in the world. Definitely don't claim to be an expert in worldwide management, but in the interactions that I've had with people like the Californians, Oregon, that type of thing, I definitely think we're punching above our weight. I definitely concur with Angus's observation and yours.
Great. Well, look, I sincerely admire the work that your institutions are doing and the research that's supporting it. I grieve a little bit, though, about the lack of public appreciation of the things that are working well. We've certainly got a lot of problems that we need to fix, but I really think we need an uplift in communication about the value of this, and your contribution tonight's really valuable, and I hope that we get the word passed around this audience a little bit and direct some people to this seminar online, because I think the message does need to get out. Good things are happening, and we want more community support for these functions, I think. This is the good stuff of water reform, and I hope it continues to prosper. So would you join me in thanking our speakers?